Welcome to the Storytelling Through Film Editing panel of this year's SAM, Storytelling Across Media, presented by Comic-Con Museum. I'm Beth Accomando, KPBS arts reporter and host of the KPBS Cinema Junkie Podcast. I fell in love with film editing as a teenager and started editing on an upright moviola, because I'm that old. Today's panel is all about how film editing can impact storytelling through pace, manipulating performances, and working with directors. Through the power of editing, I'll make it appear that I spoke with these three editors at the same time. Joining me for today's panel, I'm thrilled to introduce you to a trio of award-winning ace editors. Stephen Mirrione is best known for collaborating with directors like Steven Soderbergh and Alejandro González Iñárritu. Tatiana S. Riegel has edited on the wildly diverse I, Tonya, and Lars and the Real Girl for director Craig Gillespie. And Paul Machliss is best known for his work with Edgar Wright on Scott Pilgrim vs. the World and Baby Driver. So, without further ado, let's cut to the experts to find out more about storytelling and film editing. So what storytelling tools do you think you have as a film editor that maybe people going to movies may not fully be aware of?
As an editor, and obviously working with the director and impacted by performances, by what the camera is doing. But if you've got all that material, you can really manipulate and shape a scene to kind of mean whatever you need it to mean. The more choices, the more coverage you have, the more ability you have to change what the intention of the scene was. That's a small part of what an editor does. More importantly, it's taking all that material and taking it in, digesting it, and interpreting it in terms of the way you're putting it together. I think of a lot as, especially when you're putting together something like a dialogue scene between two people, is you're kind of helping to choreograph the dance between the two characters and who the audience is paying attention to versus not, and making sure that the audience always is getting fed new information, whether that's narrative information, emotional information, whatever that is. You're constantly making those adjustments and fine tuning to the performances to make sure the audience is getting everything they're supposed to be getting.
They shoot the movie. I get the material in basically the day after they shoot it. When a scene is complete, sometimes a scene takes several days to shoot. Sometimes they do several scenes in a day. I get that material. It's organized by my assistants and then delivered to me. I watch all the dailies, which can be hours and hours of time. And I watch it, and I'm the first audience member. I am the one who hasn't been through the rewrite process and the location hunting and the casting, and it started raining in the middle of that scene, or the shot took a long time to set up, or whatever. So what I see on the screen is really what the audience is going to experience also. Sometimes that's even just geography of a scene that is not clear to me, that if you're physically standing on a set becomes very clear. So I go through, I watch all the dailies. Obviously I have a script, which is a map of where we're going story-wise. And I try to put that together, but that means going through performance, trying to find out the tone of what needs to be there, the geography of it, the pacing, all of these different elements that go in. So as I assemble a scene for the director to then see, I'm considering all of those things. And what I kind of like to describe it, because I'm still sort of constantly, after 30 some years, describing it to friends and family, what I actually do for a living. Imagine if you're sitting at a dinner table and there are 8 people at the table, and you don't know where that conversation is going to go. And you don't know who's going to say what, who's going to begin talking, what other things might be happening at the table, like maybe 2 people at one end of the table are flirting or playing footsie under the table, or whatever it is. Editing is where your eyes go. It's what you want that story to be. So is it more important to see what you're saying or to see my reaction to what you're saying. And that storytelling element has a big part to do with how the audience is going to perceive that. So, for example, it can be a very suspenseful moment. Am I to cut to a reaction shot rather than just staying for the entire line of dialogue for you? Some of those are just little things, like somebody will start to talk, you're watching one person and somebody starts talking, and then your eyes go to them. And that's a pre-lap, a sound, an audio pre-lap. You start hearing the sound and then you go to the other person. So anyway, that's a very, very rough, quick, scattered conversation of what editing is. But what it really is trying to figure out what you're trying to tell story-wise, emotionally, pacing, tonally. A movie can be very emotional and very funny, but where is that line? How funny or emotional do you want it to be? And that we get through this whole process very slowly, trying different takes, trying different lines, experiencing different things that way to find that place where it's supposed to be.
The storytelling tools, well, I mean, I've often equated, a good editor is a good storyteller. So I suppose in one way, if you look at if you look at one definition of storytelling, and say the words in the pages of a book, basically how just reading text on a page allows you to get immersed into a story and to visualize the images and to kind of escape in the subject matter. I guess editorially we do exactly the same thing. I mean, we have the advantage of it being able to show you the pictures as well as give you the dialogue. But I guess also we're responsible for the pacing of the story, the telling of it. I mean, the story has been written by others and acted by others and shot by others. But I guess what we can do is put all those moments together and just make it flow seamlessly. I mean, it's very often said, and I've heard it, and I'm guilty of saying this tons of times, that when an editor does their best work, nobody notices, because really, and you shouldn't. It's one of those weird anomalies certainly when it comes to other things in filmmaking, because everyone can go, oh, that was a really great costume design. I thought that looks really good. Wow, that's a really exciting sound mix. I can hear there's a lot of work into that. How would you describe a good edit? Oh, that's a good place to put a cut, or there's a mix there, or that's a good time to cut. You don't normally think in that way. So it's this kind of slightly abstract approach to filmmaking, which you're kind of responsible for to a degree. But I suppose if you didn't do your job well, or if the editing let the film down, you'd probably notice that more than a lot of other elements of the film.
Well, unlike a stage production where you can't control where the audience is looking, with film, as the editor, you and the director can work to really focus where you want people to be paying attention. And that can be for them to get information or to mislead them, depending on what your purpose is in that. But talk a little bit about how you can actually craft a performance in terms of how you edit, choose shots, work with the audio, things like that.
There are some actors that, number one, give you a great variety of performance from take to take. They can, like I said, they can be much more subtle and smaller. They can be much broader. Every range of emotion within a thing, within a particular scene, all obviously tied to that scene and what's appropriate to that scene, but various levels. But we can manipulate that, and honestly, that's what we do a lot. We manipulate it by pacing a lot. We can, condense moments, stretch out moments. The subtleties, again, of reaction, of line readings. There are many times where I will take the picture of one take, say somebody saying one line of dialogue, and I may choose the audio or part of the audio from a different take, because that line reading is slightly different and inflects a slightly different meaning and gives you a slightly different meaning than what the other one does. Sometimes we do that just for technical reasons, and sometimes we will bring the actor back to re-record it entirely if there's something about it that we need to change for a story point. So there's a tremendous amount of manipulation that takes place. Then there's all the broader manipulation, which is just what is that scene ultimately going to be at the end of the day. A lot of scenes are written with a beginning, middle, and end, and it's just not all necessary. Sometimes it's much more emotionally impactful to come in, a third of the way through the scene and leave, before the scene is over. And it propels you emotionally and pacing wise into what's happening next.
Now, each director is different that you work with, but talk a little bit about what that collaborative process is with a director, just in a sense of how early do you come onto a film? Are you starting to work while they're still shooting? Do you come in after the film is completely shot? Things like that.
Yeah, the thing I really, really enjoy about that part of the job is the collaboration, that one-on-one collaboration with the director, because I take my role as an editor is to kind of help and understand and follow the director's creative process. Now, obviously, I have my own instincts and creative process when I'm just working alone. But at some point, once I've gotten a handle of what the material is and what I'm dealing with, it becomes a partnership where we're working together, and I'm then at the service of their creative process. Some directors don't want to talk a bunch, right? They just kind of, they want to look at it. Is it working? Is it not working? If it's not working, they'll say, that's not working. And then I'm left to kind of maybe wind my way through and figure it out without talking too much about it. On the other hand, another director might want to talk about everything they're thinking, everything they're feeling, so that I get brought into whatever space that they're in terms of how they want something to go together. So, I see it as one of the skills you have to have as an editor is being able to make that adjustment and being able to listen and follow the journey that the director is ultimately going to have to take. That's something that is also very tricky, right? When they're shooting the movie, I start right at the beginning, because every day they're going to be shooting enough material probably for a scene, at least maybe a couple. And so every day I'm going to spend, once I get that material and watch it, and then maybe spend 4 or 5 hours putting it together in a rough way, just to start to get a sense of it, and also to make sure nothing's missing. There's nothing that's going to box us in later on. There's nothing troubling in terms of technically focus, sound, things like that, but also just in creatively, in terms of making sure that what the scene is about, that everything you need to tell that story is there. Because on the set, a lot of times things are moving so quickly, and there's such an urgency, right? It's very expensive on the set. So people are oftentimes moving very quickly to try to get things done. They might miss something whereas I'm alone in my room watching this stuff in calm and quiet, I can then see that a lot more readily. So if there's an issue, I might contact the director, let them know. Sometimes directors feel a little bit unsure if they got everything. And so they'll give me a heads up ahead of time and say, hey, concentrate on this scene, really work with it to make sure I have the flexibility too, right? It's not just, can I get the scene from point A to point B, beginning to end? It's also seeing, did the actors give enough range in the different takes and the different performances that, like, if I want to tune this scene up to be a little bit hotter, or if I want to bring it back to make it a bit more subtle, we want to make sure that we have all those materials to go one way or the other. And so that's what I'm usually doing when the movie starts, is I'm putting that together, checking those things out, communicating with the director if they need that information. And then also just again, just starting to get the feel for what the movie is, because up until that point, it's a script, and scripts just by their nature are going to be overwritten, right? Everything is communicated in words. Once the actors start to breathe life into a character, sometimes an expression, a way they move their mouth, or the way they look at somebody can tell you, 3 or 4 lines of dialogue that then become completely redundant and unnecessary. And so you're going to start to see those sorts of things as the movie continues to get shot. And the other part of that, right, is I'm now, while the director is shooting, I'm here every day focused on these things. So I'm actually taking an emotional journey with this material that the director hasn't had a chance to be alone with it yet, right? So it's very important that an editor is able to, at a certain point, once the director comes in, kind of take a step back and not try to plow through things, because the director needs time, right, to see what those choices were, to maybe make some explorations that they didn't have time to think about while they were shooting. And you don't want to prescribe too much and say, oh no, I've already been through all that. You don't need to see that. It's that, to me, that's the fun of it, is doing that exploration and sharing that process.
I have to say, working with someone, say, like Edgar Wright, really, we're on a different level of collaboration there, because as I'm probably bored, a lot of people are saying over the years, we have this shared experience of me working on set with him and being there at the process of filming all the takes and editing as we go. So he has kind of a running commentary on how the edit's progressing, as well as how the shoot's progressing. And then, of course, we break it down to the nth degree in the cutting room, and we will audition dozens of variations and throw in sound effects and come up with new ideas, especially in sound design, for how we can do something unique here at this moment there. And actually, that's a lot of what I get with Edgar, is actually you have a lot of time there just to experiment and work on new things, rather than, it's less of a feeling that the whip is being cracked. Although I'm sure from a studio executive's point of view, they love that whip to be cracked as fast as possible. I think one reason why Edgar's films turn out the way they do is because we are, I wouldn't say given the time, but given the time within the time that we are given, we kind of indulge in trying to do something, maybe a new approach that we haven't done before, in terms of sound or in terms of construction, and based on actually what we've done during the shoot, the kind of rough edit I've put together during the shoot, we then build on that. But we take our time in one of Edgar's films, to make sure those scenes play just how he intends. But also, I guess the tremendous amount of satisfaction I get from those films is the collaboration, the collaborative aspect, the amount of input and ideas that you can throw up. At the end of the day, he'll go, I like it, I don't like it, but he'll never stop asking for new thoughts and suggestions, which for an editor is fantastic.
Since you brought up Edgar Wright, talk a little bit about Baby Driver, because that feels a little bit unique in terms of the role the editor had and how planned out some of the action was to music as well as script, and discuss that a little.
Well, Baby Driver, I think, was so different, because I think for that film, it was the culmination of a lot of processes Edgar and I have been building up over the years in other films and TV projects and things, whereby I think he and I worked, when did we start working? I think 4 to 5 years before we actually shot the first frame of film. I think I helped him. I'd go over to his place with a laptop, and we'd start just by even putting the songs together. Edgar chose the songs, but we try and do almost firstly like a DJ mix, just to see how songs would interleave one into the other. And then we do another pass where we'd embellish, we'd put sound effects in between each songs just to get an idea of how it would just kind of feel. And then there was a table read done in Los Angeles of whatever the version of the screenplay was at that point, and he sent that over to me, and then I kind of basically built a radio play of the whole film, but just in sound form. So I took the table read, put the music in, put the dialogue, the actors read, sound effects, and you could actually listen to the whole thing in headphones as like a 100-minute radio play, which I don't know if anyone's gone to that kind of length before, but I think it was very good. It was a very good selling point to the studios, who were a little unsure as to what it was that they might be buying into. It was a really good idea for them to sort of go, okay, I get it. And Edgar could just go, so you can hear this. We just need to put the pictures on top of this, but this is effectively it. And so that was that whole prep period. And then when we finally moved to Atlanta, and Edgar said, I think I'd prefer you on set the whole time now, or as much as possible. So I think that was the first time that I was there. On previous films, I'd come on set for a few weeks and go back to the cutting room. I think I was on set for maybe 95% of the time there. And it was the first time I think we worked with that real kind of immediate feedback, making sure the action was in line with the music, was in line with the duration of that section of the track, and the dialogue, and the camera move landed at the right time, and everything kind of happened. And so there was that weird moment where Edgar would sort of yell cut, and he'd quickly yell over the other side of the set, Paul, how does it look? I'd very quickly have to try and put it together. Meanwhile, the whole crew and the cast and the execs are all standing around, and Edgar, bless him, he would kind of, if I said, yeah, it's great, he would say, great. I knew we could move on, because if Paul said it was good, we got the take, then I knew we had it and we could move on. So a huge amount of responsibility there. But I guess over the years, when you're, as I was saying before, you're kind of training yourself for that moment, and that relationship that you have with one director that happens over the years. And I've been very lucky to have, if I've had one director in my life it's made a real difference, it has been Edgar. And so when Baby Driver came along, we really had a kind of second nature as to how we worked on set, and I think that's what helped make the film, I think, the total joy and success for Edgar that it ended up being.
We may have some young filmmakers in the audience listening to this. What advice would you give to a director in terms of how to best work with an editor?
Well, I think it's really very simple in that, as a director, I would apply the same skills that you're using to communicate with an actor, for example, or to communicate with your DP. It's the same thing. What you're hoping for, right, is to get a great performance from your editor. That your editor is able to inject their point of view, their personality, and all of the things into the work that they're doing, and to have conversations in a creative way, and to share your creative process with that person, and not to think of it so in a way that shuts you off from sharing what your feelings are with the person you're working with. It's also, I would say there are so many lessons that I wish I could teach every director directing their first movie. The most important of which is to understand that every director, doesn't matter if you've made one movie or 100 movies, the movie that's in your head is almost never the movie that ultimately gets made. And that's exciting, and not to look at that as a failure, but to look at that as an opportunity to say the thing that's in your head, once you start to collaborate, once you start to work with other people, that thing will start to blossom and grow in ways that you never could have imagined. And as long as the core principles, or the core of the story and the feeling and the thing that you're trying to express underlines all the decisions that were made, all of that's going to be in there. But it's a poetry, right? It's something that's going to affect people in different ways, and you're going to be able to share that thing in different ways. But you have to be open to letting the movie take you where it needs to go, based on the material you have. And for example, directors that are just starting out, a lot of times they get obsessed with, I want to do these really long takes, right? I want to set up a shot that's really complex, and it's going to be like a 2-3 minute shot that's going to go here and here and here. And what they don't realize is, by doing that, you are locking yourself in during the most expensive part of the process to something that may or may not work. And it takes years and years of experience to have the internal intuition to knowing on the day, did that work or not? A good example is with what the work I've done with Alejandro Iñárritu. It's taken him years to get to that point. And even at that point, right, he spends the entire morning rehearsing those shots, looks at them with me, figures out if there's anything editorially he wants to do within that long take, right? Before he even begins to think about shooting it for real. And then it's, however many takes that's going to be. There's so much preparation and rehearsal to get to that point. And so I would say to young filmmakers is, what's going to best serve telling your story? And you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and don't be afraid, because those mistakes usually lead to in my opinion, lead to the most exciting filmmaking discoveries. So make sure you have a lot of coverage. Make sure when you're shooting an actor, that you don't waste 20 takes on a master scene that you're probably only going to use like a little tiny bit of, right? Because the master scene is not going to be about the emotion as much as it's about where they are, just setting it up. But it's a common trap that filmmakers fall into, is they'll start shooting their master, spend forever trying to get it perfect, and then by the time they get in for their close-ups or whatever, they don't really have enough time, and maybe they don't cover everybody, and they figure, oh, we got everybody in the master, so I don't need to cover this person or that person. And then suddenly you're stuck, and you end up after the fact like, oh my gosh, do I have enough money to go back and pick up those pieces that I missed? Whereas a real good lesson is just shoot things. If there's a way to create a little bit more coverage by shooting it a little bit differently, like don't be so formal when you're first starting out. Like, imagine if you shoot something really close and then you shoot it a little bit off this way in a medium shot, or something that just creates new coverage is always going to be useful. And again, you have to really be careful. I just don't know why. I guess I do know why, but people get so obsessed with everything's got to be perfect. I think that kills exciting filmmaking. Everything should not be perfect. Let shots be out of focus. Let somebody, fall out of frame. Let something be weird, because you'll find a way, most likely, to use that in an abstract way that'll be more exciting.
And if you had to pick one of your own films to tell people to watch, which of yours do you feel either the most proud of, or felt that you had the most challenges that you overcame, or just the most satisfied with?
Again, it's a difficult thing, just in terms of each of the, like, I could look at my first film, Swingers, and go through it and talk about watching it to watch a group. Like, the reason I think that movie actually found an audience was because it was made by a bunch of beginner filmmakers who didn't quite know what they were doing and who were making tons of mistakes, but really were caring about and going through a similar life experience that the characters in the movie were going through. And so therefore it created an authenticity that nobody sat down and said, hey, because we don't know how to make a movie, we are the perfect people to make this movie. No, it just happened that way. And I think that's one of the reasons it connected with audiences the way it did. So again, like, if I look at that movie, I realize now I could never make that movie because I wouldn't have allowed myself to make some of the mistakes I made that are actually really emotional when you see it in context. Same thing with Doug Liman, the director. I mean, he had, everyone would make jokes because he was walking around with a lighting, a paperback book about how to light for movies as he was shooting the movie. But if he hadn't done that, the energy of the movie would have been completely different and inauthentic, I think. So that's a movie that I think you can look at it and see it for all of us in terms of just the in our infancy of starting to understand how to tell a story and how it actually benefited the movie and the storytelling. On the other side of that, a movie like The Revenant is full of just really incredible sweeping sequences that I'm happy that I got to participate in. I certainly am proud of the work that I did, but but nobody can claim ownership other than maybe Alejandro in terms of just the impossibility of some of the things that were accomplished in the making of that movie.
There are 3 films that I think I'm sort of the most proud of for different reasons. I mean, I'm proud of, like I said, different aspects of each of the films that I've worked on. But there are 3 that I think are very interesting for very different reasons. 2 are Lars and the Real Girl and I, Tonya. Both the same director, very different films, extremely different films. One is, they're very similar in certain ways too, and tonally, sort of this humor and emotion and oddity are very similar, and you can definitely tell that they're coming from the same director. But in terms of pacing and storytelling, they're very, very different from each other. Lars is calmer and slower and very, very pretty and subtle, super, super subtle. And I, Tonya is just chaotic and crazy and fast and not subtle at all. And to sort of compare those 2 back to back, given that they're the same director, I think is a very interesting little study in film. I, Tonya is a movie that I don't know if anybody's watching has seen it or not, but it's a film that deals with some very strong issues: spousal abuse, child abuse, these sort of things about this Tonya Harding, the skater, and this crazy situation that happened. But it also is extremely emotional and very, very funny. And that's a hard thing to pull off, giving all due respect to all of these, strong issues. And I think a lot of that comes from the editing. A lot of that obviously comes from the way he shot it and a phenomenal script. So those 2, I would say. There's another movie that I worked on called The Way, Way Back, which is a small, very simple, sweet movie. Very, very small budget. That was 2 directors and just a lovely movie that sometimes films like that are just really, I just appreciate their simplicity because it's still very emotional and very funny and enjoyable and entertaining and not like crazy visual effects and bombastic, explosions and craziness, but just a really, really good heartfelt story.
I guess certainly Baby Driver was one where I ended up having a reasonable amount of input in that. I mean, just in the filmmaking, I mean, during the shooting of it, but also, I mean, in the post-production period. Fun enough, the one I feel like I've made a contribution is actually one that we're just putting the finishing touches to now, which is Edgar's new film, Last Night in Soho, which actually, I mean, is so different from Baby Driver and probably so different from anything else Edgar's actually done. For me, is probably one of the most enjoyable projects I've ever worked on I'd say with Edgar, and also just in my little career, such as it is, because there's been so many ideas, there's been so many moments in the editing of that film where we've kind of said, what can we do here? And the editing has been so much more of an open book. And I wish I could share more of this with you. Obviously, the film's still going to come out, not due to come out until next spring, I think, at this stage. And we're just about to start the sound mix actually on Monday. But there's a film there where actually I think, in terms of what I've been allowed to bring to the table and the ideas that have been taken on board, have probably given me the most satisfaction actually as an editor.
If you were to pick maybe 3 films to recommend people watch for editing, what would you suggest people watch and why?
Okay, so the first one for sure would be The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. It's very obvious when you watch the movie. The movie is about point of view, and so the camera is working in such a way that the editor then is going to need to. Oh, sorry, I've got some bug here. That the editor is going to be working in some way to try to make you understand, right, that we are in this character's head and we are seeing the world through his eyes. So it's very literal in terms of the way it deals with point of view, right? As the movie goes on, you start to see some of these memories, and these memories become more clear. And you'll see that the way those memories are presented, instead of being these fractured fragments of kind of looking and things out of focus and hearing things out of focus, suddenly things are presented in a very formal way. And I think it's really exciting to see how the movie has essentially flipped the normal language and storytelling of saying that the thing that he's remembering, I'm seeing as objective truth. But when I'm seeing his day-to-day life, it's being presented in a much more subjective, poetic way, because and that's what I think is so great about the marriage of the editing and the storytelling in that movie is you can really see how the editing is making you feel what he's feeling more so. The other thing, and just because I happen to have worked with that editor before, Juliet Welfling, in talking about, right, like having things be random, it's one of the things that I think she's just brilliant at is being able to take shots, make jump cuts, just kind of seem like she's just throwing them together, but they all have a really specific, like they all make sense. It's not random. There's an emotional framework to the way she's making those choices. It's really bold and she can like do that and then pull off and then pull back at time. I mean, it's something else to recognize when you're watching that is when is she doing these jump cuts and why, and what is it making you feel, right? Is it disconnecting you? Is it pulling you in more so? There are so many things. Also, I mentioned it, in terms of the sound, right? Sound is another thing that editors are using as they're putting all that together to help, again, create point of view. Sound, the same way that picture can be out of focus, it's important to remember that sound can also be out of focus. Sometimes you want the sound to kind of disappear, and then you're just focusing on the breathing of that person. That is part of the blueprint that you and the director are going to be working on while you're putting the movie together, right? You're gonna start to make those kinds of choices that then get passed on to the other departments who are gonna expand on that and flesh those out more specifically. Yeah. Another movie that I really that just blew me away when I saw it in a theater, which I think is it's so clearly designed to be seen in a theater, is City of God. The opening sequence specifically, if you just watch that, it's so poetic. It's telling this incredible story in a completely non-literal way. And it's also important, if you look at that, a lot of people, I think, assume that when you're cutting with music, for example, that the relationship with music and editing is that you're going to want to cut with the music and every cut happens with the music. But that's actually almost never what you're trying to do. What you're actually trying to do is take those images and take movement within the image and have those movements work in concert with the music. And so maybe the cuts are like, think of it this way, maybe the cuts are like the bass line, but the melody is being played by all the movement and all the activity that's occurring within each shot. So that's a great sequence. Just look at like, what are the cuts doing? Some of the cuts are to things just to make you smell something, or to make you feel panic, or to make you and to then suddenly juxtapose that with somebody smiling and make you feel the exact opposite emotion. It's so dynamic, and it's a really clear example of how far you can go and how much you can communicate just through how you put those images together. And obviously, and again, it's always difficult to talk about because the editing itself wouldn't exist without the material that the editor is working with, right? Like a lot of editors talk about, oh, editing is like cooking. It's like, it's like I'm making a beautiful stew for my friends, or but and that's kind of true, but it would be as if though all your friends were working on the farm, grew the food, harvested the food, fed the animals. I mean, just all of that, everybody working together. And so it's that example is more like if you just got a bunch of stock footage and put it together. You're really dependent on the team that you're working with and the material that they're giving you. If it's got a lot of excitement and a lot of emotion to it, it just makes your job so exciting and so great. Another movie I'd love to mention, Tangerine. This is a movie that the way it's presented, the way it's cut, it creates this parallel universe where the characters, you're so in tune with these characters and what they're going through, and they're walking around in the real world, right? It's so great the way the film is designed in terms of being shot in a real location, in a way that a lot of the people around didn't even know what was happening. But what's going on with the way it's presented is you're actually living that parallel universe the same way that the characters in the movie feel like they're living in a parallel universe in terms of the trans community and the way that they feel separate from the world around them. It's so elegant, even though it seems so mashed up and ragged, but it's not. I find it so elegant and so beautiful, and it's also really good at letting shots play and giving the audience time to think, to project, to let your mind wander. That's another thing that you always want to be careful of, right? When you're filmmaking is, yes, it's good to feed the audience information and make sure that they have everything they need to understand your story. But then at a certain point, it's good to pull back and just maybe let a shot run on a person's face or on an environment, something that gives the audience time to take all that information that you've given them and let their mind wander with it, and let them project and feel emotion and feel a connection, and a connection to what the actor, what the character is going through. That's a great movie to watch in terms of just seeing how it's able to do that. To just be abstract and just think about whatever you want to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, there are a couple that kind of that I really always like, and there's sort of the some of them are the movies that come on television, and you, as you're channel surfing, you find them, and they're those films that you stop no matter where you find them and you watch to the end. And one of my all-time very favorite movies is Harold and Maude. It is directed by a former editor. And I think it's a very interesting, unique film. The way it uses music, the soundtrack is all Cat Stevens. That's an element that we haven't really talked too much about with editors. Editors have a lot to do with the music that's in a film, whether it be score or songs. For example, Tonya had a lot of songs in it, and none of them were written into the script. They were all songs that we found through the post-production process. And that was just, throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what stuck and what we liked, what worked for the scene and what didn't. Anyway, I really like the way music is used in that film. I really like the way it's shot and the way it's cut together. Sometimes, the pacing of it I really enjoy, and the story is, I think, just wonderful and quite beautiful. There's a film called, I believe it's a Canadian film called Incendie, that is really like Incendiary. It's a French Canadian film. I found it extremely powerful. I just remember when the lights came up. I haven't watched it in a while. I should, but I was just stunned by it. It's an incredibly powerful story that I never would have expected about a whole other world that these people live in. And it's really a remarkable film, and I think cut very well. There's All That Jazz is a movie that I remember really. It came out, sort of when I was in high school, and it just very, very much affected me. It was where I first thought, that was kind of the first place that I kind of began to understand that there was editing and what that kind of meant. And I just remember watching that a lot. So I guess those would be the three that they're always my kind of go-tos that I really love.
Well, I would probably point to I don't know, some of my favorite directors, really. One would probably be Stanley Kubrick, and although his style of editing is completely unique. I always recommend a film of his called Barry Lyndon, which came out in between A Clockwork Orange and The Shining. It's a film that's almost pushing 3 hours, and it's very deliberately paced. It's nowadays, probably it feels like a very slow-moving film compared to how filmmaking is done now. But I think it's probably, for me, some of the most riveting 3 hours that I've ever had, not in just terms of shot construction, but of story and how something can take time to really take you into a story and make you go through all the gamut of emotions without it going at that pace. If you really want an experience which could just draw you in, and it's just, master craftsman filmmaking, it's Barry Lyndon. In terms of editing of a different nature, I would probably go to someone like the Coen brothers. I know they've been an influence for Edgar as well. And fun enough, for me, it's actually one of the lesser known films in their canon, but one that's called The Hudsucker Proxy, which I think, for me, just in terms of editing, I think when I saw that, it was probably the first time I could see humor coming directly out of the point where the editor cut the shot. You know, there's the humor in obviously when everything glided so well, there's humor in camera moves, there's humor obviously in dialogue and acting, but I just remember just the rhythm of the cutting and everything. I remember almost slightly being agog at those, especially early those films. I mean, even just the other day, I was watching The Man Who Wasn't There, a completely different rhythm to The Hudsucker Proxy. But the Coen brothers' idea of editing and their approach to it is genius. But I think when I was going through my education, The Hudsucker Proxy was definitely up there, just in terms of how editing can be done to emphasize humor and music and a combination of all those elements too. The third film, I guess, which is sort of a little bit of both, and is another one I was a very big fan of, was actually the Jean-Pierre Jeunet and the films he made in the early 90s, namely Delicatessen, I think. And I remember going to see that as a young kid back in Australia where I grew up. And once again, just looking at, you knew that the person shooting this film, as much as I knew back then, the person shooting this film really cared about how it was going to turn up in post. And there was a lot of planning in that. And I could just see how the cause and effect of one shot against the other, and the rhythm and the timing. And it just made me realize, yes, it was editing that kind of drew attention to itself a little bit. You could see the editing was almost like a character in the film as much as everything else, because it was important. But maybe other people, as for me as an aspiring editor, I'm always the person interested in what's going on behind the clock face. I like looking at the cogs and how all that works. A lot of people are just happy watching the hands going round, if you know what I mean, and they just enjoy the film, and they would have found Delicatessen funny and amusing and everything that it so rightly is. But then I would analyze, and that's the thing. Unfortunately, that's what I would do. Is I would be breaking it down even while watching, probably slightly hampering my enjoyment of the film then by going, hang on, how do they just replaying moments? How do they do that? Which is why you have to watch a film a number of times. But I remember just watching that film particularly and thinking, gosh, look at the craft work in lining those shots up and the precision. And I just absolutely loved the precision of it. And of course that could only work by making sure the editing was bang on. And I think just watching all these films, I just knew how important the editing was, and not just editing for the sake of telling a story, because there are thousands of wonderful, stories and dramas and things of which the editor is just the person who, is not noticed and does a wonderful job of giving the performances their best on the screen. And, films like, I remember Alexander Payne's Sideways, the film which came out, I think, in the mid-2000s. I loved that film just for its sheer storytelling, the simplicity of it. It wasn't trying to be clever with the camera. It wasn't trying to be clever with editing. It was just great storytelling. And sometimes I just enjoy that more than anything else. Really, the simplicity of it. And obviously the editing just does what it needs to do that. The films that I've mentioned, I guess, are much more where editing is like more of a character, has more of a presence in terms of the construction. And I think that's probably why maybe out of all those things, I found that the most interesting, because I thought, wow, you can go this way with editing and you can go this way. It doesn't just have to be the same thing every single time. And in terms of a palette of opportunities and things to try out, I don't think very few come as wide as what editing can actually offer.
I want to thank film editors Paul Machliss, Tatiana Riegel, and Stephen Mirrione for taking the time to share their insights about storytelling through film editing. I also want to thank ACE for helping set up the interviews, and Comic-Con Museum and SAM for allowing me the opportunity to focus on what I feel is the often underappreciated craft of film editing. And thanks to all of you out there for joining us for this SAM panel.